Welcome to another Rowing Chat. Today I have a very special guest with me, Bryan Kitch. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Now, before we kick off, we're just going to thank our sponsors, who are the people who keep us alive and kicking and publicizing. And if you, the listeners, could please click through and look at their websites, we would really appreciate it. The first is Faster Masters Rowing, a new subscription coaching service from Marlene Royal. Does your group train without a regular coach, or do you get frustrated that you're coming second in races or not making race finals? If you're struggling with adapting your rowing technique and training as you age, let the experts help you. Marlene Royal's been coaching older athletes for decades. She understands the needs of masters, and so she's created monthly downloadable training plans in 6 modules. Every month you get a training program, a technique program, land training exercises, peak performance tips, rowing lifestyle advice, and a bonus module. The plans are available for individuals, crews, or for a complete club. The Faster Masters Rowing Program is the solution that will make you row faster this year. Click on the programs link at www.fastermastersrowing.com. And our second sponsor relates to digging your oars deep in the water. It's a challenge for many of us, and the canny engineer Ian Randall has come up with a solution that both prevents digging and also makes a boat go faster. Randall foils launched during 2019. These ingenious devices are glued or taped to the top edge of your oar. Get a discount on our sponsors page, rowing.chat/sponsors. Bryan, welcome. I can't believe we've known each other for a while and I've never had you on as a guest. It's my fault.
Well, I think I might have contributed to at least a couple of things, but not face to face, as it were.
Let's tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your personal background in rowing.
Well, I started off as a club rower at UCLA, so I did that for 4 years, and then at the end of that, I ended up rowing for the New York Athletic Club for a couple of seasons or summer seasons, and competing at Henley Regatta or Henley Royal. And as part of that, I was sort of on my way to grad school, and I wanted to continue to row. I was going to go to grad school at King's College London, and one of the teams we competed against was London Rowing Club, and met a lot of the folks there, and decided that was the place I needed to try to go. So raced for a full year with London Rowing Club while I was in grad school, and then I've kind of that's competitive wise, those were sort of my most competitive years. Longer ago now than I care to think about, but and then I've also done a decent amount of training, like indoor training. Sort of, I've worked with Josh Crosby doing Indo row, that side of a thing. So did that around Los Angeles for a couple of years as well. So
fantastic. And now I first got to know you when you started the rowing related blog, which was back in 2010. Can you remember what was your original vision for it?
Well, it's funny. It was really, I had gone to grad school and done classical archaeology through an MA, and I was originally sort of feeling like I was going to go on the academic track, and I got to the MA level, and I just felt like maybe what I was enjoying the most was actually the writing and the sort of research and the creative part of it. My friend and I, Justin Price, is now the head coach at Rutgers for the women. He and I came up with this idea to put together a site to talk about a lot of the stuff that we always talked about. Just we were teammates in college and roommates and all that. One of the goals being just to get my writing out there in a subject that I had been, at least I've been participating in the sport for about, close to 10 years at that point. So, so one of the goals was to kind of get out there and get my work noticed by a couple of, there's 2 major publications here in the U.S. it's Rowing Magazine, now Rowing, well, it was Independent Rowing News, then it was Rowing News, then it was Rowing Magazine, now it's back to Rowing News. But yeah, so that Chip Davis has been running that for 25 years. And then there's also Row 2K, which most people know about as well. So Chip Davis ended up hiring me to work for Rowing News. And yeah, I got to do a bunch of travel for that and got a lot of experience. So I've always very grateful to Chip for giving me a shot.
So do you consider yourself to be a journalist?
I think ideally I would still be a journalist, but I've sort of, that has become much more marketing these days. So I went from Rowing News to a travel magazine called Afar. So I did some editorial, but also mostly content marketing for them, social media. And then I've actually been working at a startup for the last 3+ years here in San Francisco. So it's a software as a service company. So I've been doing the content strategy and digital marketing for them.
Not much archaeology there then?
No, not a lot of archaeology, unfortunately. But I do think I always find that the language training that went into that was at least useful from the editorial perspective.
For sure. Now, you and I broadly, I think, started our sort of rowing media journalism blogging career around about the same time, because I started the Row Perfect blog in, I think, 2007. And we both found blogging to be a really powerful way of connecting with an audience. When did you first realize it was really working?
I think just looking at some of the analytics on some of the posts, we noticed that a lot of people were reading it and started seeing, links to it go around the internet a bit. I think fairly early on in the first 3 or 4 months, it was clear that at least people were getting excited about it. And I think that the idea behind the approach was to just have a little bit more of an edgy editorial take on rowing coverage. I think there's a lot of good writing about rowing. I think stylistically we came in with a little bit more of a I guess, sort of like an edgier approach, I guess, opinionated approach. So that was, I think people weren't as used to that. So I think it got some folks' attention early on.
I definitely remember an early article with Mahi Drysdale, and it was called something like "Why Do Rowers Fear the Erg?" Was that yours? Yeah.
So that was actually that was a product of a long series of discussions between me and Justin. We were just sort of tired of reading articles about why erging is so terrible. I think generally it's just a very good tool and everybody should do it if you're a rower. And, there's a lot of, if you overdo anything, it can be bad. And if you have the wrong psychological approach to anything, it can be bad. So, making sure that you take a careful psychological approach to it and using it like it's a training tool, like any other training tool, I feel like there's no reason for it to have the negative press, I guess.
I think so. It was lovely, and of course you illustrated it with your own artwork. You draw in pencil, is that right?
Yeah. I think that might have been, it was pen and ink or pencil. I can't remember, but I obviously had no budget for photography, so I needed to improvise a bit there, and so did a few illustrations fairly early on.
Now, just a quick heads up, if anybody else has no budget for photography, World Rowing runs a Flickr page where the photographs from the world champs and the under-23s and the juniors are always put, and they're free to use as long as you credit them. But obviously it's only photographs of internationals, but there's quite a lot of imagery there if anyone's interested.
It would have been a good resource to have back in the day there. Yeah.
Back in the day. Now, what I really want to focus on is the changing media landscape of how rowers and people who are interested in the sport get to read and find out about new fun stuff. So indulge me. Let's do a quick skim through all the years that you've obviously been in the sport, and then reviewing it as a journalist and me as a marketer. where are we now? So back in the day, there were print magazines. In the UK, British Rowing produces a magazine which is free to everyone who is a paid member of British Rowing. And you've mentioned Rowing News in the US, which also serves Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's coverage for all of North American rowing. Yeah.
And I know that certainly in the early 90s, there was 2000, there was an attempt in Australia to relaunch a magazine there, but Australia no longer has a print magazine. They have a classified mag that doesn't really cover journalism, I suppose, much.
Yeah.
What do you know about other countries and how they get their rowing news in print? Does anyone do
print
it?
wise? Yeah, I mean, really, Row 360 is the one that I know, internationally. That and Rowing and Regatta has rebranded and tried to kind of reinvent itself a bit. I know in the UK. So, I think people, because it's produced by British Rowing, I think people are skeptical of its independence at times, in terms of its journalistic viewpoints. But yeah, those two stick out. I'm not. I know there's a magazine in New Zealand as well. And the
Again, it
name.
comes from the Federation.
Yeah. But yeah, here in the U.S., it's really, it's been rowing news since about 1994, and that started out. I mean, there was no way to get results from races at that point. Row 2K didn't exist yet. The internet was still relatively new. So it started out, I think, as a bi-weekly, almost like a newspaper, called the Independent Rowing News, and that has gradually
big. It was printed. It was really big.
Yeah. It was much more like traditional newspaper approach, and then that evolved over the years as when Row 2K came along, that changed the landscape, and they adapted and became monthly and went more for the kind of glossy print, the high end kind of magazine approach, and that's basically virtually stayed the same since that time. I know they've had, Rowing News has had various sort of versions of a website over the last few years, and I think they're working on some new things with video. But yeah, for the most part, it's that landscape has been virtually sort of locked in since the early 2000s, I would say.
And you're right about Rowing and Regatta magazine. I occasionally submit articles and get firmly rejected because I don't fit there. I sent one in recently about the frustrations for masters rowers, and no, they're not into problem solving.
Yeah, got it.
Now, you write for Row 360, and it was Benedict's the main man there. What's his vision for the print magazine? Again, a high-end glossy print.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just feel like they really want to take a sort of mainstream media, very high-end approach to production. So they just revamped their website. I don't know Benedict that well, but I've submitted a couple of pieces. I've mostly done illustrations for them. Yeah, I think, from what I've seen, I think they're doing a really nice job. I know they're working with a couple of pretty well-known British rowing journalists, and Steve MacArthur down in New Zealand is a regular contributor. So yeah, I think it's a really nice looking magazine, nice looking product, and I think they do a nice job with their social media as well.
They're very international, though. They're generally focused on international races.
Yeah. I mean, I think, as a product, I mean, it's a British outfit, and I think, it started off with this kind of focus. I mean, I think the first feature ever was on Pete Reed and kind of Olympic experience and all that. It came out at Henley, I think, a few years ago.
Right.
And yeah, I think they, it's hard, right? I mean, there's a lot of rowing that just doesn't get any coverage at this point. I mean, outside of maybe some local websites or news outlets, there's a ton of junior rowing here in the U.S. that that doesn't get a lot of coverage. I know masters rowing doesn't get much coverage here either, and that's something that that community is not always stoked about. So yeah, but it's it really comes down to as far as where people get their news. I think obviously there's been the rowing media has been dealing with the same thing that every other print publication has been dealing with, media landscape wise, and there's been a big shift to social media as well. So
now Row2K, of course, started as a link service where they would just link to a news roundup of other people's rowing news on other websites, and that continues, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And
Rachel, so they have sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there was a UK equivalent back in the day, which Rachel Quarrel, who was one of the British journalists you mentioned, she used to run, which now has died.
Rowing Voice, is it?
Rowing Voice was a rebrand, but the original one was called the Rowing Service Notice Board.
Okay. That is before my time, but I know she still tweets from the handle the Rowing Voice, right? So
she does she covers international regattas. So she goes to the FISA regattas for, I think, the Daily Telegraph newspaper.
Right. Yeah.
So she's a traditional stringer.
Yeah, she's regularly in Row 360 as well. I think she did their coverage for Worlds this year.
That's right.
So, but I think Row2K has been they've evolved over the years. They've they still have their main the main page is that list of curated links, as you mentioned, but they have some folks working for them now that are writers. Ed Moran was at US Rowing until a couple of years ago, maybe, and I think he's a staff writer for them now. And obviously they do all the photography. So I'm not sure, I think it's just they've found a kind of lean, efficient model that seems to be sustainable, and they're just keeping it ticking over.
Is it the place where people in North America go to get their rowing fix, like at lunchtime? You check in.
I mean, I think on a daily basis, that's they're able to, because they have such a sustainable model, they're able to update that every 24 hours. So, but I would say a lot of kids, I'm just based on my experience, I think a lot of people are going to social media outlets now to find, find out about what's going on. And I think the more rowing folks that have embraced Instagram, I think the athletes themselves, like international athletes, are connecting directly with fans and the rowing world, et cetera, at this point too. So social media definitely plays a role in that as well, I think.
Yeah, I loved Row2K's Rowing News of the Weird section, which I kind of feel they should pull that into a book. It's just too good. But you're right. Instagram obviously is the new-ish kid on the block, and rowing is huge on Instagram. And yet, is it really news? I mean, what do you see on your Instagram feed?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of years back, I think it was really sort of felt new and fresh, and everybody was kind of getting it. Everyone was excited about it. I think it evolved. Well, it partly, Instagram went away from the chronological to the algorithmic timeline, which kind of made it less newsy. But then also, I think at this point we're just sort of inundated with reposter accounts, and obviously, like rowing related was a reposting account for the most part too, because people want to share their photos, and if you have a wide following, they want to share it with you so you can help them grow their following, and that works. It all makes sense, and that's still continues in a lot of different sectors as well. I mean, that's the bread and butter of travel Instagram too. So, I think that's evolved a little bit. I think for me, there's just less, there's a little bit of a been there, done that sort of feeling there for me now. But then, certainly take nothing away from other folks that are doing a nice job of that. And I think that they're continuing to do that. I think then there's also the kind of the fat Ergos evolution of Instagram, where, it's the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where you go from trying to curate a very sort of beautiful feed, to the just whatever meme you can dig up, and they're quite clever. I like those guys, but yeah, it's not it's definitely a breakaway from, and I think that's partly why they're so popular. Is it's the answer to the endless pictures of beautiful sunsets.
Exactly. So let's go deep and broad. I mean, social media for rowing is, I think, clustering into some very clear sort of niche groups. There's a really active Facebook group called Masters Rowing International, with an awful lot of beautiful sunsets, but there are also deep discussions about advice and who has waterproof socks and dock shoes and all sorts of things like that. Then of course there's always Reddit. The Reddit rowing community has been going for years and is still pretty active.
Yeah,
there are some old discussion forums. I mean, the Rowing Illustrated boards, which Sean Wolf runs, is still there, and I think Rec Sport Rowing is still there. I don't know if you were ever there, but
that's not me, but yeah.
It was a Usenet group, and if you know what a Usenet group is, you're definitely old. Are you seeing a sort of balkanization with people splitting up into lots of tiny little subgroups? The people who want to follow memes are all there doing it on Instagram. What do you think is actually happening in practice?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think on the red, I think they tend to split up kind of based on demographics a little bit, at least as far as I can tell. I think the Rowing Illustrated folks tend to skew a little older. And I think the Reddit folks skew a little bit younger. So, the types of discussions and the types of things that are going to take off on one of those platforms are going to be pretty different. I think for me, the most useful rowing social media, I think, is Twitter, just because yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's real time, and often the most influential folks who are on the scene are posting about it or providing insights, and it's not that seems to be where some of the most interesting discussions take place at this point too, just because I feel like I don't think the elite athletes generally are engaging much on notice boards and Reddit and that kind of thing. Yeah, but they do sometimes have they go back and forth on social media, and I think Matt Pinsent does that a fair amount, and some of the, like, Greg Sturls, maybe less so now, but and Sarah Cook, so I think from a usefulness standpoint, I think Twitter is great. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, they've all developed their own kind of character and nature, and they all, as a result, have a little bit different demographics that use it, and you can kind of, depending on what you're looking for, you can sort of go where the kind of news or coverage is that you want.
I slightly sense that people stick with the thing that was hip and new when they were first into rowing. Like as you said, the Rowing Illustrated boards, and then Reddit is so broad, but I can see why it has a different user group. And then, of course, people who grew up with Twitter are into Twitter, people who are growing up with Instagram are doing that. And here are you and I talking on a podcast, which, of course, it's, again, even newer again. Tell us a little bit now about your future plans for rowing related, because you've reinvented it recently.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, I went through a phase very early where I was, very sort of structured in all my publishing, and I think at the time I had a lot more time to dedicate to it. That was kind of where I was, wanting to put most of my energy, and it's how I kind of ended up on the career path ultimately that I ended up on. And again, thanks to Chip for taking a chance and hiring me at Rowing News. So, but yeah, after the site had been around for well, I guess 8 years, and it's always fun to publish things and see a reaction and feel like people are reading what you're writing, and a lot of interesting things have come out of that. But then I also felt like, well, in order to justify the time, I think I need to make this into a little bit more of a premium setup. So yeah, there's a platform called Substack that is a local startup here in San Francisco, but is, I think, co-founded by Kiwi. So there's another
Hamish.
Kiwi tie-in for you.
Hi, Hamish.
Right, right. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend it to anybody that wants to start a newsletter. It's very easy to use, and it has a payment integration, and there's a kind of very easy to understand paywall and subscription type that you can outline. And yeah, I think it's been, I kind of set a goal for this year in terms of what I would like to see as a kind of a side income. Like I said, I've got a full-time job doing other stuff at this point, but I like to keep a hand in rowing, especially as I get more into the marketing stuff. It's nice to do some journalism, and I think part of the reason I like Substack for that reason too is that it's purely subscription based. There's no advertising, and I feel like because I'm in marketing, I kind of get enough of the advertising stuff on a daily basis anyway. So yeah, I just get to think purely about the editorial. So yeah, so that's been fun, and I coming up already on almost like this will be issue 9, I guess, will be coming out pretty soon. So getting towards a full year, and yeah, try to do a couple of interviews at least a month, and have our own version of curated links as well, and some continuing some of the editorializing and opining about this, that, or the other.
Tell the listeners an example of some of the articles that you've done and the interviews you've done.
Well, one of my favorite ones, actually, I just recently published, is with Justin, because he's, he and I, like I said, we were teammates in college. He had, he went to law school right after college and got, he actually has, I think he has a JD, but he also passed the bar in California, ended up immediately going into rowing coaching. And he was an assistant at UCLA for a long time, and I know his goal was to be a head coach. And so getting, when we both set out, he was very early in that trajectory. So getting to interview him after his, this is going to be his second year at Rutgers, his third year at Rutgers. He, he's really, it's just fun. It feels like things are coming full circle. But yeah, I mean, I think some of the articles. Let's see. Now I'm on the spot. Let me think of. I did a long one with Neil Chugani and Matt Pinsent about how the Henley sort of drone coverage was put together, which I feel like, as I'm getting to kind of be totally free about what I choose to write about, getting into some of these more. I mean, it's obviously related to rowing. It's a little tangential. But yeah, it's just how they put together that whole, that I think it's some of the best coverage in the world. So yeah, getting the background on that and how, all of the negotiating and et cetera that went into that. And then also getting to connect with folks like those two, obviously it's pretty cool. So
certainly is. And I was honored to be part of their live commentary team this year.
Yeah.
Henley. So you're, right. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time. I was very lucky. I got to commentate on a dead heat race, which was just fluke. it was a New Zealand crew against London Rowing Club.
Yeah. That was the Wanganui.
Wanganui, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was an
Aramaho
insane race.
Wanganui. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
something else. But hey, that's
Wow.
Henley, isn't it? That's rowing. We get insane races.
Right.
So thinking more, tell people, what does it cost and how can they get onto the rowing related newsletter?
So yeah, if you've got the URL helpfully there. Right here.
And for people who are listening, it is?
Yes, it's rowingrelated.substack.com. And Substack is spelled Substack. So, yeah, it's flat rate. Basically, it's $5 a month or $30 for a year. And any credit card should work. The payment is handled through a platform called Stripe, which is it's another tech company, but they streamline everything and everything's pretty easy. So yeah, that's basically it. And yeah, I'll probably I should have talked to you about this beforehand, but we should set up some sort of a promo based on a RowingChat extension of the URL or something like that.
We'll work something out. Everybody keep listening, and maybe it'll be the sponsor for our sponsor for October.
Right.
When you sign up, can you see the past editions? So if I want to see that Neil Chugani, Matt Pinsent interview.
Right. Yeah. As soon as if you subscribe, you get access to all of the archives as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now, the last thing I want to move on to is, what's the future for rowing journalism? So I wouldn't call myself a journalist, but I'm a pretty active writer and content producer in and around rowing, as are you. Earlier this year, we both read Megan O'Leary's rant on her blog about the lack of coverage of the final trials that US Rowing obviously does every year to select its team for the World Championships. And she was furious that there was no press release, there were no journalists on the spot. Mm-hmm. That contrasted somewhat with British Rowing, who does have final trials and does invite journalists, but their journalists were all twittering about fury that British Rowing had gagged them from taking any photographs or publishing any live video from the actual racing, even though I figured they were allowed to report the results afterwards. But that was a big change for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for the U.S., for our purposes, I mean, it's more just a question of who's going to pay for it. There's part of the reason that there's not more rowing media is just that it's difficult to fund. There's not that many advertisers, and more broadly available advertising for the most part is not particularly relevant to rowing. So subsidizing a lot of coverage is tough. And one of the things that actually in that the Henley sort of article about the drones and everything, that's a great example of using the resources at hand to their fullest extent. Just because they, that's a regatta that's somewhat uniquely positioned to be able to do that. Whereas trials, I mean, even if you were to sell tickets, it's just harder to subsidize that kind of coverage. So also they move around and
different parts of the country. And you live in a big country. I mean, in the UK, it's nearly always at Caversham or they're in Harswinkle, and Caversham is very easily accessible to a large part of the rowing population in the south and east of England.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think from the coverage perspective, for me, it's never been a goal to really to do just straight up coverage, just because I feel like we are living in a world where if you just want to know the headline, you can know that immediately. So yeah, I mean, I think ironically enough, I actually did a long interview with Kara Kohler I don't know whether it was simultaneous with that post or beforehand. But that's in one of the newsletters from earlier this year, just kind of on her training and background. So obviously she had a good world championships this year. So that worked out well for both of us. But yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that Megan O'Leary was talking about is there's a lot of great stories, and I think the folks of us that are sort of out there trying to write the long form stories about rowing. We're doing what we can with the kind of resources available, and if there were a way to subsidize travel out to trials and cover it in a broader way, then that'd be great. But yeah, it's kind of sort of at this point, it's not financially realistic, at least here in the U.S., to have that kind of an approach. So
I certainly get that as an independent journalist for you. And so to contrast with British rowing, which perhaps as a federation is slightly better funded than US rowing because the structures are somewhat different and they have a national lottery that is very orientated both to high performance sport and to grassroots sport. And so they keep some very active social media channels, fully staffed and active. And I think they do a pretty good job of publicizing the sport, from indoor rowing to coastal rowing to Cornish gig boat rowing to you name it, they cover it. And as a federation, I think they're probably the gold standard. Certainly Australia tries hard, but is a little bit, again, split. So we now see crews starting their own Instagram feed. There was a cute one I picked up recently, which is the Danish women, like the heavyweight sweet women across the whole of the Danish squad, which is nice, There's the Deutschland Achter. They've been running their website and their social media profiles for years. And obviously, different athletes have cycled through that program during that time, but they're now a brand. The Sinkovich brothers, I think when they retire, that'll be the end of that brand. But, it keeps going.
Yeah, no, I think that's something where social media has been great. It allows the athletes to connect directly and kind of share their experiences. I think in cases like with the with the Deutschland Achter, and also the SXULLs series that's been going on with the German sculling team. That's a fantastic series. It's spelled SXULLS, I think, and it's that .de, I think, is the site. But they've got a whole a series on how the trials have gone and the training and background on the athletes, and and I'm not 100% sure what inspired it, but obviously it's a professional production company that's come in and really done an outstanding job. So, every now and then there are things like that, and, there is budget that appears. And I think more often, in Germany, rowing is just a little bit more of an established, a mainstream, I guess, sport than here in the US. But I think, going forward, it's surprising to hear about folks not being able to take their own pictures or I don't know whether it was posting the results immediately or taking video or something. It seems like a little bit of a break with the past. So I'm not sure what that's about really. But there does seem to be. Maybe not across the board, but there does seem to be an increasing desire to kind of control all of the media surrounding events these days. So
that's true. Not just events. I had an attempt to research an article about the contracts that international athletes are under in their contracting to the National Federation. And I did get some completely off the record responses with people actually showing me the clauses in their contracts that relate to media. Sadly, I never managed to pull together enough different ones to actually make an article, but if anyone's listening and wants to help me out, anonymity guaranteed. But it's very clear that some federations are pretty heavy-handed about what they will and will not allow an athlete to do. And yet, what I find curious is the federation restricts their ability to speak to journalists, but doesn't restrict their ability really to use Instagram. And of course, as a, mini bits of video, obviously images, and other things are definitely news, what I would classify as news, that leaks out. Someone says, I can't tell you the number, but so-and-so just did a really good erg score. And, that was big in the pre-Rio in the British heavy men. I think it was mostly he was supposed to have beaten the world record. That news got out pretty fast.
Yeah, the Stan Liludis score too, I think made it out as well. That was, so there's definitely, I mean, because I think, if you asked the federations if they loved when that happens, probably, wouldn't say yes, but I think, it's just another reason why I think for the athletes themselves, building a little bit of a brand and connecting with the rowing fans around the world, I think it's a great thing. It gives people a real window into their experience. And, I think it's also good when they share the not so great parts of it too, just so people have an understanding. I think some people have taken done some pretty brave things of late on Instagram and other social, just to kind of help, paint a more complete picture of what's, what their experience is. But I think, going forward, it's hard to say really. I mean, I think there's more and more outlets for news. I think, to me, what that means is, there will probably be more and more desire for curation and for, not authoritative, but at least informed voices to create editorial, just because there's just so much more to process and there's so much more out there. So I think, going forward, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. There's more material to talk about. The sport's evolving. It's growing internationally. There's this question of what we're going to do about the Olympics and what the format's going to be and whether it's going to change and all that. So that's all interesting discussion fodder. But yeah, I mean, here the hard part is that the market is still pretty small, and traditional means of advertising are not really viable, at least in terms of website, driving traffic side of things. So I think it's I don't know how to sum it up, but it's in a place where there's a lot of opportunity, and I think every now and then somebody comes up with something totally new, like the Fat Ergos approach. If you do come up with something that's totally new or something that is not currently being done, people notice and people appreciate it. I'm not sure what the next thing is going to be, but be interesting to watch and wait.
I'm secretly hoping the next thing is going to be podcasting.
Yeah,
I would say that, wouldn't I?
Right. Yeah, no, I think your approach to the international, having an international, series of different podcasts from different perspectives. I think that's a good. It kind of gets at what I'm saying. Or there's a lot of opportunity for people to kind of curate things, bring them together, and give people one place to go to learn about a lot of different things that otherwise are pretty fractured.
If anyone listening would like to join the RowingChat podcast network with a new show, a new voice, please get in touch. You don't have to commit forever. I think there's scope for short series, 4 or 5 episodes on something in particular. So do just get in touch with us. We're easy to find online. Now, before we wrap, Bryan, I'd love to get a rowing tale for you. As listeners know, I curate an anthology, a printed book every year that's called Rowing Tales, and then the year. I'm just coming up to the final few days to collate this year's one. Have you got a rowing tale for us?
Well, yeah, I guess it's a little on the short side, but I always think of this. So first time I went to Henley, I went with the New York Athletic Club in a Y-fold 4, and one of the folks that was in that was Rob Milam, he's fairly high up in U.S. rowing, but just he had rowed at Princeton and competed for the New York AC for a lot of years, and it was not his first trip, and he always kind of went out of his way to take me under his wing a little bit, and yeah, one of the I actually didn't have any of the appropriate clothes to go to, so. Fortunately, it was a mostly lightweight boat, so we were all basically the same size. So Rob gave me, effectively a suit, including shoes. And I showed up the first day, and I'd buttoned my jacket, and he just looks at me and shakes his head, and he points at the buttons on my coat, and he says, "Sometimes, always, never," as he goes down there, because I had buttoned the bottom button. So yeah, I just look at that as kind of one of those. I had to laugh at myself, and also he, again, an example of him kind of showing me the ropes in as nice a way as he could.
That is a fabulous tale. And if anybody knows the rules of gentleman's dress in the UK, there are a lot of rules that you can break unwittingly.
Right. Yeah, and maybe that's a good one for Jack Carlson too. I'm sure Jack would have been shaking his head at my look, but.
And since that time, I hope you've got yourself your own blazer.
I do, and actually now I am the proud owner of a London Rowing Club blazer that I make sure to don every New Year's. So with the Remenham tie and everything. So.
I was going to say, for the humor factor for your American friends who haven't got a clue what they're looking at.
They have no idea what's happening. Yeah. But, yeah, it's all part of the fun.
Bryan, thank you. It's been great having you on the show. I think we should do this more frequently. And to the listeners, if they want to get a hold of you, where's the best way to connect with you online?
Really, I mean, it's all linked from rowingrelated.com. So social media is all there, and the 8 years of content still there. And then it is the link to the newsletter there as well. So that's probably the best spot.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. And to the listeners, please continue to support RowingChat. We are advertising supported, and you can see our monthly advertisers at rowing.chat/sponsors. Different ones cycle through during the months, and we definitely appreciate it if you can support us by supporting them. Till next time, goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you very much.